All right, welcome back to another episode of the Kitchen Table Podcast where business gets done. Today we are not only in Maryland, but we're virtual again, all the way in, is it Asheville?
Yeah, we're right outside of Asheville, so
Heck yeah,
Western
dude.
North Carolina,
If you
borderline
couldn't
Tennessee.
tell by my young man's appearance here, look at him. I mean, dude, this is like the quintessential business cowboy look. I love it, dude. Brandon, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing?
Good, man. I'm excited to be on here, and I really and I connected with you on Facebook, and saw a lot of the stuff you do, so I reached out to you, and appreciate you reaching out and getting me on here. So this is cool for me.
I think this will be something that will need to be a regular for you, man. So I try to, anytime I see talent, man, I try to nudge it in the right direction. So, like I said, man, you look great. Um, Brandon, tell us a little bit about. I don't want to do too much of an introduction without letting you just do that. So tell us a little bit first and foremost about your business, what you do, how long you've been doing it.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm in the blue collar field, so I started in construction as a laborer, did some commercial framing, home remodeling, things like that. Started my business in 2019, so we're just ending year five, starting year six, and I'm a painting contractor at this point. We've been about 80% residential for the majority of the business, and about 20% commercial. And this year, we're really going to dive into some more commercial work, try to double our business size. And that's pretty much where we're at right now.
Fantastic, man. I hear, I get to meet with a ton of different entrepreneurs in the blue collar. I mean, I literally just got back from an event, Blue Collar Ballers event that we put on now 2 years, our second annual live event. So I get to meet with a lot of blue collar industry folks, home service folks. I don't see enough, residential or commercial painters, man. So that's pretty cool. What would you say are well, first and foremost, tell us like how'd you get into that? You know what I mean? Did you just wake up and like, man, I just really want to be a painter? And then I'm sure the entrepreneur path, take us through what got you to that and then the path to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, definitely. So I was born
Oh,
in
I
South
told you, man.
Florida.
He said,
Yeah.
I was born. Here we go. Here we go.
Yeah, so I was born in South Florida, grew up there. I moved out of there when I was 17. So I grew up in Davie, Florida, and that's in Fort Lauderdale, a little bit by Miami. Grew up on South Beach a little bit. Anyway, so I dropped out of high school at 16 years old. Kind of did my own thing for a little while. Moved up to North Carolina at 17 and found myself needing a job. Felt like I had no education, didn't know where I could turn. So a guy who lived down the road from me, he had his own handyman business. He did mostly home remodeling, but he took on some other big jobs. I mentioned commercial framing was some stuff that I did with him. But I found myself needing a job, and I was at the time I wasn't married, but I was dating my current wife. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go down the road and I'm going to talk to Don. And we were out for the day doing something. And I got home and he was sitting there in my driveway. And he was talking to my mom and he says, hey, does your son need a job? I need somebody to come work for me tomorrow. So that next day I went to work for him and I worked for him for about 5 or 6 years. And I thought that was my path, was going to be in the trades. I picked up framing really quick. Picked up remodeling that type of business pretty fast. I've got a high IQ, but man, I did terrible in school. So it was kind of one of those things that I wasn't really too sure. But once I found something physical to get my hands on and to start working on, I really excelled at that. And I thought I was going to work for him forever. I mean, he would make comments that, his kids didn't want to take over his business. And he's like, hey, I'll leave, my clients to you, all my tools, you can have all that. And so after about 5 or 6 years, I just started having this burden that maybe I shouldn't be working for him forever. And I didn't know what it really was. And I started really praying about it. And finally, God gave me an answer. And Don, the guy I worked for, he said, hey, I need you to start working Saturdays. And at the time, my wife was pregnant with our second. So I said, you know what? I can't do Saturdays. I'll give you 50 plus hours a week, Monday to Friday, whatever you need. But Saturdays and Sundays, I've got a family. That's the time for that, you know. So he said, okay, I think you might need to find a 5 day a week job. So right there, I gave him my 2 week notice. And man, I had no clue what I was going to do. I knew that I had a trade that I learned. You know, I knew I could paint. I knew I could frame. I could, lay shingles. So I didn't think I was going to have any trouble finding a job. But man, I had no clue where I was going. So that day I left from talking to him, and a guy came up to me at my church, and he said, "Hey, are you still working for Don? I need my house painted." And I said,
Hmm.
"No, I'm not, but let me come by and take a look at it." So I went and looked at it. I had no clue how to price a job, but I knew how to get it done. So I started Googling how do you price a paint job, you know? And I started looking at it. I'm like, okay, worst case scenario, if this one side took me 3 days, that side took me 2 days. So I just basically, came up with some numbers. I put my bid in at like 4,500 bucks. I got that job done in about a week and a half, and I made more money than I ever felt like I made in my entire life, because I came from 14, $15 an hour. And at that point, I was like, this is it. I'm going to start a painting business, you know? So that
That's
was
super
that was the
awesome.
start of the business itself.
Painting, I would imagine, is super low over. Well, at that point, everything's super low overhead. When you're at
Yeah.
that spot where it's just you and you're a one man band and you're, I had a young man that reached out, for the consulting ad that we were running, excuse me, with Ross, and we're targeting a very niche market, right? Like, do you own a solar company that's seven figures, or do you own a roofing company that's seven figures? We didn't say that at first. So the young man reached out and he's like, "Man, I'd love to learn solar. I'd love to do," but he was a one man band. The most he'd ever done in a year was maybe 600, and that's not uh, despicable or anything like that. But it's just at that level, you're the guy for every little thing. But man, profit's great. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like
yeah.
profit's great, but you can't scale that. But at any rate, I totally get that. You know what's funny, Brandon, is I applaud you because I hear all the time, dude, like new business owners that don't even know they're business owner yet because perhaps they're doing a situation just like you. They work somewhere, they go bid a side job and don't know how to bid it, get themselves in trouble all the time. Probably didn't take the time to even Google it. They don't know how to bid it. They don't calculate like, well, what are my costs going to be? What percent markup should I put on it? What if they tell me no? They get scared, they
Hmm.
underbid the job just to get it, and then they're in trouble. And so good for you for not doing that, obviously, because it would have started you off on a heck of a foot. And who knows if
Yeah.
you'd be here. So, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
not turning a profit could be a pretty big discouraging moment to not want to move forward with that. So you took your first job, you made some money, more money than you ever felt like you made, and the rest is kind of history in terms of how you got into this particular vertical. And you've done really well since then. I think you said last year was a record year for you, and you're looking to, what? Tell us more about where you're at currently. Some of the struggles. I understand you got going, and then you got a few folks, and then you brought in some help, got some coaching, and really took off. Take us through some of that. For someone who might be listening, that's kind of in that year one, year two phase where they're just getting a couple sales folks, they're kind of stagnant, they're not really sure how to grow. Take us through how that was for you.
Yeah. So I'll say definitely coaching for me is so invaluable. I mean, you can learn a lot on your own. You can read and you can do a lot of that stuff, but man, there's something to be said about somebody who's gone before you. And that's why I reached out to you initially because, we're in two completely different industries, but business is business. It's sales, it's marketing, and it's SOPs and it's structures of this is how we operate. And man, it's like it doesn't matter what industry you're in the blue collar field anyways, it's all pretty much you need to be structuring a business as a business. And there's so many people who they get to this point where they think, oh, nobody can paint better than me, nobody can put a roof on better than me, I'm going to be, and that's what I'm worth is my quality. But when it comes down to it, yeah, that is great. If that's what you want to do, then that's your position that you're putting yourself in, and that's okay. I can't look down on anybody who's making a living for themselves and their family. And, if you want to get up and work hard every day, that's on you. But I chose a different path. So, for the first maybe, I don't know, 6, 8 months, I did everything myself. If I needed some help, I'd call on a guy down the road. He'd show up, he'd work a day, and then, I'd take it back on my own and try to make as much as I could per job. But then, you know, I started realizing that there's really no big future in this. And somebody had told me, they said, if you ever fall off the ladder, what happens to your business?
Yep.
And man, it's done. If you are a one man band, you fall off the ladder, your business is done. And I started thinking, yeah, that's a good point. Something needs to change. So what I did was I started, trying to look at bigger jobs, and I had put a bid in on a project that was way bigger than I could ever handle by myself. And I knew that. So once I sold that job, I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to secure, some guys to come help me. So immediately went on Craigslist, started looking for subs on Facebook, started calling people around, and I ended up getting a group of guys who I was able to get started on the job. They started producing it, and then at that point, I thought, okay, I've got a ton of free time. Let me start diving into sales, you know. And I never really realized I was in a sales position because I'm like, okay, I'm a painting business owner, I'm not in sales, but you could have the best product in the world. And if you don't know how to sell it, you've got nothing because nobody's going to buy it from you. So I really started getting into sales and listening to a lot of sales podcasts and reading books on sales and all that. And that really excelled me because then I started realizing I just need to be getting as many jobs as possible. And by the time, so when I got that big job that I secured my first group of subs on, it was, I think, around October. So we were coming into the slow season. Well, I started selling as much as I possibly could. And by the time spring came around, I had 40 some exterior jobs
Wow.
sold, deposits given, and I thought there's no way I'm going to produce this on my own. So at at the peak of it, I was probably at 60 hours a week. I was managing 2 to 3 projects, and then I was doing 3 estimates a day. And that's when I started making sure that I'm going to find a project manager. So that was my first hire. Got a PM. He's still with me today. I mean, he does a great job of it.
Sure.
And
One of my
then,
first hires as well.
yeah, yeah. And then
Outside
I
of
focused on
salespeople, I've
sales.
always had a couple of those, but I
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
come from that background. So unlike yourself, I think that tends to be what we bring inevitably, right? If you come from the background of I used to do the work, well, naturally, that's kind of where we're going to focus on, right? And for me, I'd always either been in sales or sales management or sales VP. I'd gone up the natural progression ladder across the industry over the last 20 years. So sales was where I felt comfortable. In fact, building sales teams is where I felt even more comfortable. So naturally, the business seems to be comprised 90% of sales folks and 10% of everything else. And that did fantastic for the first few years. And it wasn't until last year when we went to scale into the new office that I really took, and this is the third technically business that we built in the last 6 years, one as a consultant, but you know, getting past that comfort zone of that 10 million mark and okay, second office, we're going to burst that bubble. We're going to do some things we're not used to doing. I increased my overhead significantly in areas that were not sales, assuming sales would always do what it's always done and
hmm
just continue to grow, continue to scale, continue to improve. And the socioeconomic factors I couldn't have predicted in last year aside, we just it wasn't as easy, and especially in the second market, and there were differences in the market that I hadn't considered, and just a multitude of things that I got to learn over the course of a year. But I've always seen like where we tend to have our experience in is where we're always our strongest in our businesses, especially early on. And so, it's an interesting dynamic. I'm glad you early on latched onto, okay, I got to get some sales guys in here, but I'm going to learn as much as I can. It reminded me of me in that regard, where the number one thing I could suggest for anybody is just, dude, always be learning, invest in read, right? Learn. If you don't know it, read it. Read a book on it. Read a
yeah.
book on sales, right? Grab a coach on sales. That's what you did, right? You got somebody
hmm
to come in and say, and you guys went from well, you had a record year last year, and you're looking to what, double, triple that this year?
Yeah, we're going to try to double that this year. And I think introducing commercial new construction is going to be a really, really easy avenue. I think commercial roof coatings, fluid applied roof coatings is another easy entryway to, you know, getting getting commercial opportunities and getting those old warehouses with old metal roofs, putting some fluid applied coatings on there. Um, that's going to be I think a good entryway into commercial because we've done a ton of commercial repaint and we're just trying to expand our avenues. But fluid applied coatings is just it's paint when it comes down to it. So it's a pretty easy market to get into for us.
And you've done some of that commercial already, so you know how to bid on the jobs, you know how to get in there. I think a lot of that, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of people knowing you and feeling comfortable with you, and then you get repeat work. And
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but we're starting some of that. I've done some commercial, and a lot of that's just been hotels and stuff like that that I literally just
Hmm.
garnered myself. But now we put ourselves at the what is the acronym? It may be a local thing here in Maryland, but it's a government. We belong to this group, and SEA or SEB. I can't remember. I should know
Hmm.
that, but at any rate, 10% of the projects here in Maryland have to go to that group, right?
Oh, interesting.
And so they're going to get a look now. Minority owned, veteran owned. There are other variables and factors that like increase your odds of getting looked
Yeah,
at
yeah, I've
first.
heard about a lot of that. Something that somebody told me they said that I could get my wife as a co-owner
Yes,
of
you
the
could.
business,
Yes, you
and then you
could.
can now be woman owned.
Hmm.
So that is another way to get your foot in the door with some of those clients. What we're doing is I've got a good friend who lives locally here. He's a acoustic ceiling tile, drywall, steel framing, insulation contractor. So he's got a pretty big scope of work, and we've come behind him on a bunch of new construction projects. But his business, I think they're 30 or 40 years in business, and they've worked for, probably hundreds of new construction contractors. So he's actually gonna kind of help us to break that barrier. We're gonna come in under
Hmm.
him. He just did a major school project in our area.
Mm.
Um, I think he said that his let's see what is my train of thought there.
Major
Um,
school project in the air. We actually just got one ourselves, but one thing I wanted to ask you about, if you don't mind me jumping onto it, because I've got
yeah,
the ADHD myself, and so it's hard to hold the thought. And it's been sitting there for a bit, so let's not lose it. You said something. You said something that a lot of entrepreneurs and high achievers are going to find they might scoff at. But in the end, I think a lot of us are trying to achieve that. And as you said, you took a little bit of a different route. And it sounds like you put your work in, you work the 60-hour weeks, you know, uh, and everybody's different, right? But
yeah,
you've got it set up currently where you're like, hey, man, I'm really only having to work X amount of hours per week. And I'm working, on the business, not in. And, I think that's very smart. But, talk to me about, that for you and how important that is to you that you do that now, also while trying to grow and get into new ventures and verticals. Do you think that's something realistic that you're going to be able to maintain? Are you willing to kind of sacrifice for a bit to make this happen? Talk to me about, how important that is that you maintain that, or do you have plans to kind of, hey, look, I understand I'm going to have to sacrifice again, or is that just a strong line in the sand? Like, no, no matter what, I'm not sacrificing my time, my family, my time. Uh, because a lot of guys will work 80 hours a week or do whatever it takes, and then they're going to do those
hmm
things. And you're kind of
yeah,
doing that now, and I think that's excellent. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't have the experience, especially early on, like you do, to be able to talk about. They're still, nose to the grindstone, pushing through. And I don't think that that's always the most strategic approach. In fact, working on the business instead of in as soon as you possibly can, I think is the best move. So tell me about that. Is that your line in the sand? Like, look, I'm not doing anything that requires more of my time, or this is where I wanted to get within this business, but I'm also willing to, sacrifice to then get back to that point in a new vertical.
yeah. So what I think, you've got to put a value on your time. And a lot of the times, what I see is, am I going to do this task or can I delegate this cheaper than me putting 2 hours of my work or 2 hours of my time? Now, I will say that
And
there's a
have you
few things.
quantified your time? I'm just curious.
What is my time worth?
I'm just asking. I mean, you don't have to tell us literally. I'm just saying, have
Yeah.
you quantified it? Do you know? Like, do
You
you know?
know,
Like, hey, my time's worth X, so I'm not putting me in a. You don't
yeah.
put $100 guy in a $10 an hour task, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's kind of the dynamic now. I'm not I'm not ever in a position to where somebody says, "Hey, I've got 1 hour. How much is it going to cost to get you here for 1 hour?" You know. Really it's like I don't know. There's no physical dollar amount on it, but I do value my time so much to a point that, there's certain things that can easily be delegated. And not only that, but specialization is a huge thing. I mean, we're sticking with, fluid applied coatings. We're not venturing out into drywall finishing and drywall hanging. And, we could easily tack on another section of our business like window washing. Well, we're already up there on the
Right.
ladders. We can get window washers out there. But man, when you see those, like I'm sure you've seen those videos on TikTok of these guys with the squeegees, and
Yeah.
man, they're taking those windows and they look like glass, and then they've got videos of people walking through them in a couple hours. Our guys are painters. We're hiring painters. We've got that system completely down. Really, our whole business is sales, marketing, and customer journey. You know, so I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but as far as my time, like the delegation aspect, I know that if I have one person dedicated to one job, they're going to do way better. I mean, I love doing sales. I love going in and meeting customers and meeting new people and having that rapport building aspect. And I enjoy doing that. But when I go and I do an estimate and then I leave and then they call me back 2 days later with some questions if a one call close didn't happen, or even if it did. Say the job is sold, but then they have questions about the bid. Well, now I'm back in the business or on the business doing other things, and my time is not as a salesperson anymore to that that one project. So I have to really turn down a lot of those opportunities. Say somebody from my church calls and they want me to come look at their house. They would be way better suited for me to send one of my estimators out there because they're going to have that dedicated time because that's their job, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
So yeah, I mean, I will say that there is a line in the sand that, like you said, that I will draw, and that's my family time. You know, I'm there for breakfast. I'm there for dinner. I try to get home every day at minimum or at maximum 6 o'clock. Sometimes things happen, and I get home a little late, but I try to be there for my family, for my wife. I got 3 kids, and that time is so short. My dad died. I was 4 years old, and I have almost zero memories of who he was because, man, he was a workaholic. He was a salesman. He had his own vending machine company. He had pawn shops, and man, he was doing financially. My mom told me this was back in the 90s. He was doing like 100K profit a month. And this is back in the 90s. So he was killing it. But he
Yeah.
died at 40 years old. I was 4 years old. My brother was 6. And man, there's nothing to show for it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a great outlook, and that's my point. Is I think a lot of young folks, old, because it doesn't matter if you're 20 or if you're 40 or hell if you're 50, and you're getting in this and you're wired a certain way, especially if you're wired, the quintessential entrepreneur. If you're familiar with EOS,
Yeah.
the cliche visionary. We typically you one can easily, and I know I'm guilty of this mistake, busy with productive.
Hmm.
And if you're not busy, you don't feel productive. And I know I have to kind of often, and I've gotten way better at it, but like, listen, just because things aren't all wacky, they're not going to be like they were when they were. And then other things, there's new chaos that ensues inevitably as you continue to scale and get bigger. But I respect that. I think that's important. I'm working on my first family edition, and I'm doing like hell currently to build everything I can now. But I know it's not realistic, when he or she is first here, that I'm going to be able to just pump the brakes. But I do believe that I'm going to inevitably, like, hey, I need to be here more, right? And so everything
Yeah.
I'm building currently, but the reality is one, we just assume that we're going to have that time, and that's just not. Your father passed away at 40. You know what I mean? I'm having a family later in life. I'm working my butt off, and I want to be able to have my family enjoy it and then protect it. But I certainly want to enjoy them. So I really respect that, man. I think that that's a cool and admirable line in the sand for you, and I think that people can learn from that. Like, we can still have success and still do well. You know, you don't have to kill yourself. Sure, if you want, depending on what it is, you might have to put that work in those out. You just, that just is what it is. But where you're at, I'm curious to see what that looks like when you start getting in other verticals. But I would bet you're not willing to take it on if it compromises that. From what you say, that is your line in the sand. So that's interesting. I like that very much. And I don't think that necessarily prohibits, you can still be home and do a whole lot. We can make it work. That's for sure. If we
Yeah.
have to jump up and get up and find time after the kids go to bed or something, I'm sure that's something that, if it had to happen, would happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now here's the thing is like I could get rid of a sales guy and I could do all the sales, right? All that commission would be in my pocket. Maybe 100 grand a year extra. But it's like, okay, now how much are you working? Because I could easily do that, jump in and do 2 to 3 estimates a day, and then still come back to the office when I'm done, get all my other admin stuff done, and then you're still killing yourself as far as
Yes.
working by the hour. So a dollar amount of my time, you could say 100 grand a year is not worth me spending my time doing those things. Because here's the thing, if you're tied up in sales and you're doing all the sales, well, where's the room to grow your business?
100%.
You know?
100%. And I mean, too, you look at it just from a base level, it's so simple where it's like, okay, yeah, you replace you one for one. That's not going to make much sense at first, but it does allow you to start working on the business, you to grow, you to establish the high level relationships, get a better pricing for your products, shake bigger hands, make bigger connections. But ultimately, once you get 3 or 4 reps, now you are making more than you would have been making by yourself. And now those three
Yeah.
or four reps turn into 5 and 10 reps. And now you're making well more than you would have. And again, you can continue to grow the business. I mean, it's just, it's not even, the two don't compare. If you want to just work yourself to the bone for the rest of your life and just do everything, I have a hard time understanding that outside of just fear of growth, fear of change. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't make sense to me. So, that's not a business. That's a job. You know what I mean? That's a
Exactly. Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
So, but I know you've got a lot of big plans and the big things coming up this year that you want to work on. Take me through some of the stuff that you're looking to get into this year, if you can, and kind of where you expect things to go from here. What are your plans this year as it pertains to this business and other things you may be looking at? I know you've got some ideas for coaching, consulting, working with other folks. Take me through some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely the business. I plan on doubling our business size this year, which looks like bringing on a few new team members. More than likely, once we get this, section of the commercial aspect rolling, that's going to come with a dedicated project manager just for commercial projects, because I'm putting a bid in right now on a big 80 unit residential build, and that's probably a 3 month project. Having guys there for 2 to 3 months, and if my regular project manager's out doing, you know, 5 to 8 residential projects a week, well, he's not going to have time to go and check in on projects there. So that's one aspect of the business that I'm actually in. I'm also looking to acquire new businesses, blue collar based, and uh, and then on the side, I'd really love to get into consulting. Now, as
Hmm.
far as that goes, I'm going to be very particular with who I take on, because I'm sure you know this, that you can get in consulting with somebody and waste your time because they don't want any change. They don't want to make any big decisions or make any big moves. And then you're kind of stuck there. So you got into this entry position with these people, and then you just have to back out because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And getting to this point that I'm at now, looking back, it took me way too long. If I started another business, I truly feel that I could do it in the first year, hit over $1 million, you know? So it's once you acquire that knowledge, once you unlock that in your mind of this is how things are done and this is how things are supposed to get done, you don't forget that. And that's one of the hugest benefits of consulting is, I've unlocked those things, you've unlocked those things. You're probably, way ahead of me as far as that goes, more locations and sales building and teams like that. But once you unlock that, it's there and you can very easily see the problems. I was talking to a guy last week about his business and he's doing around 700,000 a year and he's having cash flow issues. So I said, "Well, what's the big issue there?" And he's like, "Well, it's cash flow." And I'm like, "Okay, but it's more than cash flow." I said, "How do your sales look?" And he says, "Oh, I've got a 75% sales rate." So I'm like, "Okay, how many estimates are you doing per week?" And he said, "Oh, I did 5 this week." And I said, "Okay, how many did you do last month?" And he said, "Well, I did 9 last month." So right there, that's not a cash flow issue. That's a marketing issue. You're not bringing in any leads. I mean, how are you going to run a business off 9 estimates a
Line
week?
estimates all
And yeah, you might have a 75% close rate, but what are your prices? I mean, are your margins even hitting to a point where you can make good money? And so yeah, you might be at a 75% close rate, but if you turn your prices to where they really should be, because there is industry standards, but then again, it's like you do have labor overhead and then your profit margins, and generally speaking, in this business, we're shooting for a 50% gross profit. So if you're selling under that, yeah, you're going to be selling high because you're underbidding yourself,
right. You're just
you
giving
know?
stuff away, and that's not really selling anything. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I hate when people say that. It's just like
Yeah.
you're just literally giving stuff away. Like, what are you
Yeah.
selling at that point?
Yeah. So, talking to that guy for about an hour, I saw so many problems and I'm like, man, these are such simple solutions. And that's really why I want to get into that. So I probably will take on, a couple clients, and as long as it's I can recoup my money, financially, because my time is
Right.
worth,
100%.
you know.
100%.
So
And I
and
couldn't
then
agree
business
more, by the way.
acquisitions. Um, that's another thing this year. I'm gonna look into acquiring a second business. So
Are you already doing that?
I'm on the lookout. Yeah. Now, if it's another painting business, that'd be a huge benefit. But I think there's a lot of other businesses, plumbing, roofing, the just the blue collar field,
Right, and it
HVAC.
doesn't have to be to your point. I mean, because business and especially in the remodeling, I would still put that in remodeling. That field, if you're able to package that, whether it's good, better, best or not, it's such a similar. I mean, it's a sales methodology, and then the back end is just okay. Well, it's all business from there. The internals are the same. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
like, I think that that's a safe bet. I really do. It's not like you're going from like the business that you're currently in to some kind of like subscription based business or tech or something like that. I mean, you're staying in the field that you know. So I think that would be, I admire your hunger and you remind me a lot of myself in that like, hey, I've got all these big dreams and I still have those and I'm not letting go. I've got goals this year to do, the consulting thing I had completely put on hold for a year. We focused exclusively on PC. We had to, right? Like we were starting our new office. It was our strategic growth year. Spend a bunch of money, learn a bunch of lessons, take a step back to take 5 steps forward. We're well into that now. We're launching a new vertical in retail, but one that we've done a million times. So it's not foreign. It's just, uh, it's a lot, right? And so taking on that consulting, it's more. I enjoy doing this. I enjoy talking to guys like you or other folks, whether we work together or not. I get something out of that every single time. And even the gentleman that I spoke to that just didn't make sense currently, that's okay, right? Because maybe we work together in the future. Maybe I make a good connection. But just like yourself, I'll probably only be taking a couple on. But we're at 4 o'clock. We're doing our first mentorship call. I'm going to do that every month. That's free, totally free. If you're listening to this, you want to get in on it. reach out to the podcast link, kitchentable.net. And I think there's a consulting tab you can click on. But I'm not selling anything in that. That's quite literally just something I'm going to do every month as a mentorship. In fact, you and one other gentleman were the first to respond to that. I just think that's a cool thing I can do because I have two mentors. Shout out Adam Champagne and John McCambridge. Adam, I know, listens to the show quite a bit. These guys are high level freaking people. Adam's talk about time and value. Adam's time is not cheap. Adam is the CEO of some of the biggest companies in our the DMV area. Uh, you know, he's worth quite a bit. And if you knew what he was and who he was affiliated with, it's obvious. And so for him to take that time and just even answer the phone, give me advice, call me, invite me to his home, right? On like, hey, Saturday night, 6 o'clock, can you be there? I'm going to figure it out. I'll be there, right? Because I'm going to go sit down and spend an hour with you and learn from you. Yeah, man, I'll be there, right? Same with John. John making a monthly meet me at the Shake Shack once a month. Like, you find time because you know that if you're too busy and these guys who run companies 5 times your size are like taking an hour to come sit with you, you make time.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that, man. I think I'm going to enjoy doing that. I think that just also helps me kind of get back in the vibe of just doing that. But I commend you for your goal setting and knowing that. I think that's just so important, man. Knowing where you want to go. If you don't write these goals out, if you don't have goals, a clear path forward, how do you know? I mean, how can you expect to achieve anything of real substance? I just don't, I don't know. I don't know how one
Yeah.
would do that. Or you're just aimlessly, don't expect to grow at any significant rate without setting those firm goals and then KPIs to know, am I on the path, right? Where are those key performance indicators that tell me I'm doing the things I need to do? So I love what you're doing, Brandon. I love watching your journey. You're a sharp guy. I love the whole outfit, man. You got me feeling a little bit. Look, this is anytime it's storming or I'm in a hurry, you can tell because I'm not. I think my closet's 90% suits and stuff like that at this point. I've only got but so many traditional like the roofer outfits, and here I am running around like this. Say, this guy, look at this guy, showing up on the show, looking super sharp, man. I
Well,
love it,
man, it's a
man.
big deal to me, so I wanted to make sure I look good and
Well, I
present
love that,
myself
man,
well.
because I'm
So,
usually the guy sitting here by myself in a suit like a jerk, but I appreciate that. Thank you. But on a note, I was getting a haircut earlier, and we were talking about presenting yourself and the value of what you present says a lot about, if two barbers are sitting there, right? And this was a young protege of my barber's, and he owns a salon. He's an entrepreneur. We do a lot of talking and sharing ideas. He's got big dreams. Well, this protege says, well, I think it's valuable the way that I present myself because if I'm sitting next to somebody else of equal skill and I present myself like I'm to be taken serious or I value myself, inevitably that's going to help me kind of get that edge, right? Because I'm sort of dictating in my appearance right off the bat how serious you should take me. And I love that. I thought I was like, dude, spot freaking on. I couldn't say it better myself. Like, there are things you can do if you're a mess and you're sloppy and you look that way, and maybe you're the greatest salesman that ever lived, but why put yourself in that spot of having to overcome that than rather have the outside match what's going on the inside? If you're an absolute dynamo on the inside, let that outside show that, right? Put that value and that work into, presenting that in your appearance, how you look, how you wear, what you wear. You don't have to be rich and wear suits and everything else, but just look like you value what you're presenting to someone. Because at some point, that may be the only thing you get. You might be in a room full of absolute winners, and you got to make that one connection, and you stand out because you put that extra effort in, and that's the only thing you get when somebody who's got very few words to have that don't cost millions, right? Imagine if you had a chance to meet Bezos and you got to stand out, right? You're going to want to look, like this gentleman right now, right? He's going to stand out in a room full of guys in jeans. If I'm dressed this way, he's dressed like that. Who do you think is going to stand out? And so I'd ask you to consider that because I get a lot of questions on why I started dressing that way. And originally it started to be because it was just how I epitomized success visually, and I wanted to show my sales reps that every Monday. And then it became a daily thing where I'm like, you know what? I feel good when I present. I want to step into what, that person I think is that next level entrepreneur. And if this visually helps, a visual representation of that helps me feel sharper, helps me to be taken more serious, let's go. And I cannot tell you how much of an impact I really do believe it has, because I get a lot of questions about it, and guys are like, "Yeah, I'm gonna start stepping up my game. You know, how long you been wearing suits?" And it's just little stuff you can do, man. But anyhow, I didn't mean to go on a tangent on that, but I couldn't help but just I really was impressed and continue to be impressed by how you look, man. I think that's a great look for you. The consulting thing, that might be something you might want to consider. I'm just saying. I'm just
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
So you show up and pop up on a call looking like that, man. It's hard not to take a man like that serious. So,
Yeah.
Brandon, before we jump, where can our listeners and viewers, you mentioned the YouTube, that's getting going, but the streaming service has been going for quite a bit. So a lot of our folks stream this. Where can we find you? Facebook, social media, all the things. Tell us where we can find you.
Yeah. So I'm on Facebook, Brandon Lafer, and then Instagram, Brandon Lafer. I'm considering another venture is getting a podcast going. I don't know if that's going to be in-person setting, streaming, but it's all going to be blue collar focused. I want to bring on salespeople. Man, I meet people all the time who really would be great people to get on here. I mean, it'd be great to have you on there as a guest.
Sure, be happy
So
to.
that's not something that I've actually gotten started yet, but maybe we'll be on the lookout for that soon. But yeah, I'm on Facebook. That's the best place to find me. LinkedIn. But I'm not big on Instagram. I'm not really big on social media. I use it as I need it, but
Sure.
it just depends on where I plan on going because social media is such a huge aspect. I mean, you look at the
Right.
the Facebook Reels and Instagram Shorts, and man,
Sure.
that's a really good way to blow your business up. Now, if you want to check out our business, it's Alpha Omega Painters LLC on Facebook. We've got an Instagram, and we do our social media in house. So we're pretty regular posting on that, so people can check us out over there. So
Awesome, man. Check that out. And look, if they're following you, I'm sure they'll see when you announce that podcast. And I love it, man. Yeah, we had the Blue Collar Ballers podcast for about 5 minutes, Ryan and I, but we had some very cool guests on there, most of whom I've had on the kitchen table. But I love it, man. I think that's excellent. I think you should do it. And I'm sure if our guests are following you, they'll get to check that out. So anything you'd like to plug, man, we can always have you back on and revisit where you at. But Brandon, thank you again. Thank you so much. You look sharp, man. You have a beautiful family, a beautiful business. God bless. Keep rocking and rolling, man, and go crush the year. And we will talk to you soon, my friend.
all right, I appreciate it, Ken. Thanks for having me on, brother.
Absolutely. All right, guys. See you next time.